Welcome, Lev Ha'ir members and guests, Heart of the City. This is part 2 of Exodus, revisiting the book and the movie. Class 2 out of 3. And it happens to be Thanksgiving week, so we're actually going to start with an outpouring of thanks for Thanksgiving week, and that is always a good way to start. Start with gratitude. So I am going to welcome everybody to unmute now, and then Bobby maybe can remute people, but to speak freely, whatever you are thankful, grateful for, or put it in the chat box, and I will read it out. Feel free to unmute because I know our cups are full even when they also are distressed. What are you thankful for?
I'm thankful. This is Amy. I'm thankful for the technology that means we can all get together even when we're not in the same space.
Mm-hmm. Fran, we're doing a circle of what are you thankful for Thanksgiving week. You can unmute and share if you'd like, or put it in the chat box. Thankful for family and friends and the potential for snow this winter. Community, friendship, health. I see these things coming into the chat box. What else, folks?
I'm thankful for extended family that include me in Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful that my dad is still doing well so far. He's home and stable.
Jeff says, thankful for family and friends and knowing that we have plenty of food for the holiday when so many don't. Let's have a few more. What are you thankful for?
I'm thankful for being part of this group.
Susan, we're doing a circle of thanks to start today's class. If there's something you're thankful for, you can put it in the chat box or just unmute and say it. I'm thankful for really long-term relationships in this community, like knowing each other year after year and showing up for life.
I'm thankful for friends and family and improving health.
How about a last one? Good health. Okay. Gather all of that up, fill the cup up.
Okay, Julie, I'm going to remute everybody again.
ahead.
So,
Yeah.
give me 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, unmute again and we'll be set.
Wonderful. Thank you. We're going to do our Torah prayer. Let's do it together. Oh, we should have stayed unmuted, but that's okay. We can just all do it. Do it out loud in your own space. Ends with la'asok b'divrei Torah, for learning together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you for the inspiration to immerse ourselves in lifelong learning. Amen. I'm going to do a moment of visual access now. I'm actually beaming in from Mount Rainier, Maryland, where my son Rafi lives, just across the border from Washington, D.C., like literally a few blocks. Him and his long-term partner, Lucy, have a wonderful home. They keep the home at 63 degrees. So I always don't know why, but it's always freezing. So I have my little space heater next to me and many layers of bundling on. It's all good. It's nice and toasty where I am here in my little Zoom sanctuary. And yeah, I have a special basement room with an exit to the outdoors for a fenced-in backyard for my dogs. So some people are looking at the yellow wall here, and it's very cozy and it's all good. And I'm here for a few days because it's his birthday week. In addition to, we won't see each other for Thanksgiving. We'll each be in other places for Thanksgiving. So that's my story. And I see in the Zoom room, I think 17 people, if I'm counting right here. Really good to see everybody. Oh, and now more people. Yay. Maybe 18 now. Hi, Bill and Ann. Okay. And we are doing part 2 of our Exodus, revisiting the book and the story. And how we're going to start with this is by well, first of all, let me just see if anybody had anything from last week that you want to bring into this week for either ongoing kind of making note of it, or a feeling or an idea, anything from last week that we want to kind of include that's on your mind right now. Not last week, but our last session, the first session we had, which we were. Does anybody want to pull anything forward from last time? Okay, and how many people here were able to do the homework assignments or the assignments? I don't like to use the word homework because there's a negative implication, and here people are doing it because you want to do it. Okay, Jeff was able to, and other people able to watch Israelism? Diane, Fran, our usual suspects. Okay. I really encourage everyone, when you get a chance on YouTube, to watch. It's 1 hour Israelism. It's we're going to be talking about it today, but we'll also describe it for people who didn't get a chance to watch it. I also, a couple people asked me afterwards about with a little bit of unclarity about something we did at the end that we're going to do again at the end of each session. So I want to kind of do some clarification about when we kind of made the distinction between safety and discomfort. And we did a like fist to 5 evaluation of how safe did you feel in this space? And people put up 4s and 5s for that. And then how comfortable, like you might feel uncomfortable, but still safe. And if you hear the distinction there, safety is, I'm cared for, people have my back, I'm in good company, this is a safe space, nobody's going to physically hurt me, nobody's going to attack me emotionally or intellectually, I'm safe, is different than feeling like I agree with everything I heard, I love everything I heard, I feel comfortable with everything I heard. You might feel safe and a lot of discomfort. So we're trying to kind of get used to that distinction, because sometimes in the Jewish community, there's a real blurring of safety and discomfort. And that makes it hard for us to be in a space where not everybody thinks the same or has the same political perspectives or commitments. And yet we can still actually be in a community where we do show up for each other. Where we're safe. We're not going to be physically hurt, emotionally, intellectually hurt, but we might not agree, or we might not like what we're seeing or hearing. Does anybody have any other comment on that, or does it make sense? Because I think a couple people were confused about that last time. Evie?
I was one of the people confused.
Thank you for reaching out.
So what you're saying is, in this hour and a quarter, do you feel safe? Do you feel comfortable? Not do you feel safe in the community in Philadelphia or somewhere else?
Exactly.
Right?
In this Zoom room, in this class, for this hour and 15 minutes, how safe do you feel and how comfortable do you feel? And it's actually generative to feel some discomfort at your learning edge. Otherwise, you'd already, we're kind of all growing into our understanding. And so it's going to be somewhat uncomfortable if you're actually engaging and learning and challenging, each other in a, generative way. So in every which direction, but it doesn't, you might be safe and not comfortable, fully comfortable. We noticed that in the fist to 5 last week, where most people felt 4 or 5 in safety, but there was a range of 3 to 5 in comfort. So you can kind of get a sense of where our group is with safety and with comfort. And that was really helpful to me and illuminating to be aware of that distinction between safety and discomfort. So anybody else want to comment or question any of that?
This is Amy. Yeah, all week I kept meaning to send you an email that how much I appreciated it. And my thought was, oh, she's not doing that for this session. She wants us to learn about this because we might need it in future sessions. Yeah. And I felt like it was just a really, I felt like, gee, I wish everybody did that all the time at the end of everything.
Oh, wow.
That kind of checking in on where people were at. And so I really personally appreciated it.
Thank you, Amy. And yes, I think it's a discernment that's useful for life in general, because not just for this class, but we're assessing it for this class. So thank you, Amy. Anybody else? Safety and discomfort. Any comments, questions? Okay, well, we are going to move on here then, and we're actually going to circle around to a sharing that's going to end us up talking about the topic of this week's session, which is what were we missing when we read Exodus or saw the movie Exodus? What wasn't in the story that is also part of history and truth? But we're going to circle around and do it in this way. How many people in this room, it would actually be helpful to see your faces in the Zoom box for this, but you can always use the chat box if we can't see you. How many people here either went to Hebrew school of any kind at all in your life or had kids who went to Hebrew school? Raise your hands. Okay, a lot of people. That's great. So we're going to do a little exercise here. If you have a piece of paper, you can make yourself 3 overlapping circles. So it's like a Venn diagram where you have one circle, another one overlaps. Well, actually, no, 2 circles, and the overlapping place is the 3rd space in it. So I can do it and hold it up, but if you have a piece of paper, you can also do it. So it's, how a Venn diagram has like, I know, can people see my 2 overlapping circles here? Okay, I could have made it with a fatter overlap. I would have if I did it again. But anyway, okay. So in one box, we're going to have the title Israel and in the other box, we're going to have the title Judaism. And now I'm going to ask you questions, and you put a check or star, some kind of a marker where this thing falls in your Venn diagram. Okay? So in Hebrew school, how many people studied the high holy days at some point? Roby, I see your hand is up. Do you have a question? Okay, maybe not. If so, you're on mute and we can't hear you. I'll come back to you with your hand. Or you can put it in the chat box. Okay, so how many people studied Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur just as important holidays in the Jewish calendar? Okay, so is that about Israel or is it about Judaism? You choose your place. There's no right or wrong answer. But for you, where does that fall? How many people were taught to chant the prayers of, let's say, Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur? Like, could you chant the prayers? Okay, Jeff, you did. So if you did learn how to chant the key prayers, kind of read the Siddur and chant the prayers, put a check in the box, or just put that check out in the wilderness somewhere on your piece of paper. So it's not in either part of the Venn diagram. Okay, so we've got Okay. How many people learned how to blow the shofar in Hebrew school? Okay, so it goes out in the wilderness. Nobody learned it. I don't think anybody here raised their hand. Okay. How many people learned how to read prayer book Hebrew in Hebrew school? So if you did, put it in your Judaism box. Or, I mean, you can put it wherever you want, but prayer book Hebrew would be something about Judaism. How many people learned some modern Israeli Hebrew? Okay, that goes out in the wilderness. How many people learned Israeli geography? Okay. How many people learned Holocaust history? Okay. I mean, you all went to Hebrew school in different eras, but either you or your kids. So let's see again, Holocaust history. Okay. So a lot of hands there. How many people learned about the settling of Israel, like the pioneers making the desert bloom kind of thing? And sort of the birth of the nation. Okay. Let me see if other people want to throw out a question about the kinds of things you could learn in Hebrew school. How many people learned about the sacred cycle of the whole year, including like the more obscure ones like Tu B'Shvat, the birthday of the trees, or Shavuot? Some people learn those things. Okay, so put that in where you would put it in. How many people learned about anti-Semitism? Okay.
But Rabbi, since I didn't go to Hebrew school, I learned about it from my mother and family members. So that's why I'm saying that a lot of these things don't apply to me when you say Hebrew school, but I learned
Right.
about it through.
Learned it some way or other. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So anti-Semitism. Evie, are you raising your hand with a question?
How many people learned an Israeli dance?
Oh, good one. That's a really good one. How many people learned other Israeli games? Like, did you ever play Gaga? My kids all learned Gaga. Okay, Israeli games. How many people learned about the IDF, like the Israeli military? Some people did, okay. Anybody else have a question? Fran, you have a question? Do you want to ask the group?
Yeah, how many people learned about youth groups? It is Jewish youth groups.
Jewish youth groups, okay. Okay. What about Israeli recipes? Louise learned some of that, okay. Interesting.
Not that I cook.
Not that you cook, okay. I do, okay, other people have questions about any piece of this. How many people learned about Sephardic communities, Jewish communities, like traditions, music? Diane definitely did. Louise did. Okay, so the Sephardic food,
Well,
history.
the reason, so what's so funny is the reason I learned about it was I was trying to prove to my mom that we could use beans in certain things during
That's
Passover, and she's like, that's not part of that's not what we believe in. And I'm like, but there's a group that believes in that and they do it.
Uh-huh. How many people learned about the JNF, the Jewish National Fund that plants trees in Israel? A lot of times
I actually have a tree.
synagogues would do like fundraising campaigns to plant trees in Israel. How many people grew up with Israel bonds being a big part of the experience? So you're placing each of these things somewhere in your Venn diagram. Other questions here. Let's see. How many people? Yeah, go ahead.
It's Amy. No, Israeli folk songs.
Oh, folk songs. Yeah, that's a good one. Folk songs. Oh, what about historic sites in Israel, like the cave of somebody, the cave of Machpelah or King David's this or that? Okay, historic sites. Also, Israeli nature is something that gets taught sometime, like the plants and trees and flowers. That's kind of an interesting thing too, nature. Like tiuling. Okay. How many people, oh, go ahead, Evie, question?
How many people went to a Jewish camp?
Okay, so Jewish camp, good one. And then the question kind of more is like with camp and youth group, those are sites where you could have learned any of these things. So in a way, I'm kind of separating those. Those would be, we'd be asking the same content questions for those sites of learning. How many people in Hebrew school was visiting Israel a focus? Like the joy of getting to go to Israel. Like when I've taught Hebrew school, sometimes we would put the kids on a fake airplane. Like we would role play. Everyone's getting on an airplane. Here's your passport. Here's your airplane ticket. We're going to Israel. And we kind of enact flying to visit Israel. That was part of the curriculum. So did anybody do that? Like kind of get encouraged to visit Israel? Okay. Who did anybody learn the sacred texts, the history of the sacred texts? Like what are the different books, like the Mishnah, the Talmud, the codes, the Midrash? Like did people learn the history of our great literature? Okay, anything else anyone wants to ask about here?
Well, I think it's Amy again. I remember is celebrating Israel Independence Day like it was a major holiday.
Oh, that's a great one. Okay, so Israel, how many people like went to parades or programs for Israel Independence Day? Yeah, okay, hope people are mapping all this on your Venn diagrams. What about Holocaust Remembrance Day? That's a big one. And let me just quickly get a sense of if you went to Hebrew, like I'm trying to get a sense of the era that anybody was in. And let's just kind of think about the age groups in this Zoom room. Like, was anybody in Hebrew school in the 50s? Okay, 60s, 70s, 80s, or had kids, 90s? I guess my kids were in Hebrew school in the 90s, yeah. 2000s. Well, okay, I think that's probably, some of you probably have grandkids who are in Hebrew school, or went to Hebrew school. Okay, so any last questions here about possible kind of curriculum topics?
One of the things that I was thinking about was the difference in learning the history of Israel, depending on what decade you went to Hebrew school. Because if you think about it, people who went to Hebrew school in the 20s, 30s, and 40s didn't have a history for Israel. They had a history for Germany and stuff like that. But people who went in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and beyond that started to have the history, and people living through the 7-Day War, people experiencing it in real life, but also how they interpret it when they had to read about it in their children's history books as to what really happened.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on that in a minute. Okay, Evie, you got another question?
Did any people have knowledge of non-white Jews?
Was that taught? That's a good question. So that's sort of like the Sephardic, Mizrahic, and all other kinds of multiracial Jewish communities. Okay, super. So Let me just ask a couple last questions. How many people learned about concentration camps as part of your? Okay. Warsaw Ghetto Uprising? Masada, where the Jews went up the mountain and fought off the Romans? Okay. So I have, both taught in Hebrew school for many, many years before I started running my own Joyful Judaism House of Study, which Ethan, who's our beloved youngest person in the congregation, came all the way through. But I taught in other Hebrew schools for a lot of years and have seen many different curriculums. I actually ran the Hebrew school at Or Hadash for 5 years. And, and then I had my kids in Hebrew school. They went to Germantown Jewish Center. Rafi got kicked out for being a bad boy, but, some of my kids went to Germantown Jewish Center. And so I sort of intimately saw the curriculum there. So this is what I want to ask you. This is not a perfect experiment, but looking at your Venn diagrams, what's your balance of things that are under Israel and Judaism? Not in the overlap, but sort of like just percentage-wise. When you look at how many people actually made a Venn diagram here? Okay, great. So if you made it and you have a cluster of little checks or stars, what are you noticing there about the distribution?
I have more in Judaism than I have under Israel.
Interesting.
Me too.
Ditto,
Bobby?
ditto from me. Way more in Judaism than Israel.
I wonder if there's a difference between reform and conservative, if that plays into it at all. But mine was conservative, heavy emphasis on Judaism.
Interesting. Okay, really interesting question. So how many people here had more of a reform kind of milieu and either conservative or beyond milieu? Yeah, I think that is a very interesting distinction. And I think the decade that you were in Hebrew school matters. It's really interesting because in my Venn diagram, there's way more under Israel. And so I have folk songs, geography, nation building, Israeli dance, Israeli games, Jewish National Fund, Israel bonds, encouragement to visit, Israel Independence Day. For my kids, Holocaust Remembrance Day was a big thing too, and their Hebrew school has been much more recent times. And I have way less under Judaism itself. I mean, some things are overlapping, such as the holidays usually have a component that's geographic, but they also go way beyond that. Anyway, I want to pick up on what Louisa, well, let me just first say, any more comments about your Venn diagrams, anything you're noticing? Karen?
Yeah, I actually have equal amounts, but I have more stuff outside, like what I didn't learn. And I'm thinking, I went to Hebrew school from kindergarten to confirmation. I'm thinking, what the heck did I learn? It's like, I spaced out the whole time.
Karen, I will tell you.
I don't remember what.
It's not you alone. Jewish educators have studied very rigorously what value there is to Hebrew school. And it turns out between kindergarten and confirmation, there's a 7% increase in knowledge, identity, participation. So it's a very ineffective way of doing anything. Now, Jewish summer camp is totally different.
My parents spent all that money and I don't know what the heck I learned.
Right. I think that's really borne out in the research. But Jewish summer camp, which is an immersion experience, and you have a really strong peer group, and it's not just tacked on after the school day when everyone's exhausted and unruly. And, Jewish summer camp is a totally different experience.
Yeah, I was after school and like who wanted to be there?
Mm-hmm.
The teachers were, frankly, sorry about this, but they were mostly losers. I mean.
Right. And also, like, it's almost impossible to teach a language in like a once a week or twice a week slot for a few minutes. That's not how you learn a language. So pretty much in non-immersive Hebrew schools, people don't end up knowing how to read Hebrew. which is most Reform.
I did learn that. I have to say, I
That's
did learn that. Yeah.
Okay. And some people learn how to read Hebrew phonetically, but not understand it. It's not like
We
really,
did. Yeah.
Mhm.
you know, that's a more likely outcome, is you could phonetically decode, but not understand anything.
Well,
Well, pick up a word or two, right?
Hey, Bobby?
And along those same lines, I mean, I learned the basics of Hebrew in Hebrew school, and I only went one day a week that I recall. But I also reinforced that because my family would go to Friday night services quite often.
And that probably made a big difference.
So
Like
it was
living Judaism to you. It made some sense, not just being
right.
sent
So
to
the
Hebrew
language
school.
was really reinforced.
Yeah.
And that's how I learned a lot of the, prayer Hebrew.
In today's very assimilated world, a lot of kids go to Hebrew school once a week. Their family does nothing except maybe goes to High Holy Days, maybe not. Although a lot of people do a Seder still. That's the most celebrated Jewish holiday of the year. Anyway, Evie.
When I was teaching Sunday school at a Reform synagogue, it was kindergarten or first grade, I was challenged because I taught an Israeli dance.
Wow. So how was that received?
Not well.
And what years was that, Evie, roughly?
1960.
Really interesting. Okay, so going back to Louisa's point that the decades matter. She's very right that, of course, before there was a nation state starting in 1948 called Israel, there was pretty much no focus in Hebrew school on Israel. The Reform movement was opposed to the founding of the state of Israel, very strongly opposed, starting in 1885, which was the momentum of the Zionist movement was surging ahead, and Jews were very endangered in Europe. And the Zionist movement got born as a political movement to take people back to Israel. There always had been spiritual Zionism of like, it's the heartland, the temple was there, the Torah comes from that area of the world. That's not saying we should all go move there. That's saying that, that's like kind of a spiritual center that's kind of relevant to our history and our hearts. But the political movement to actually move Jews to that piece of the world, it started in the late 1900s. And the entire Reform movement was against Zionism. They thought it would detract from safety in the diaspora, where people were desperately trying to make homes and be respected and set down roots and be American or German or Italian or whatever you're going to be. We're going to read a brief quote about this in the next session's reading. But anyway, the whole Reform movement is opposed to Zionism. And actually, at that time, the conservative movement was the biggest movement in the United States. Like as you move into the 20th century, most Jews were conservative, not Reform. But the Reform movement is growing and growing and growing. But by the time the state gets formed by the UN in 1948, the Reform movement has had a complete about face, as have all the denominations. And at that point, it's post-Holocaust. The whole world is in turmoil and guilt and terror, basically, from what happened in the Holocaust. The Jews being the ones in terror, and the rest of the world in guilt. And it was a moment when Israel, got the endorsement of the United Nations, became a nation. We all know that part of the story. And from then on, what started happening, it's post-Holocaust, post-nation, slowly but surely over the next few decades, Hebrew school curriculum shifted to being almost exclusively about Israel and the Holocaust. A huge shift away from, really actually understanding how to do the prayers or lead a prayer service. Or, still there are places, and the more you spend, conservative and Orthodox do more than the more progressive movements. The more progressive Jewish movement shifted, they had a very strong component of social action. Like the Reform movement is incredible on social action. Really standing up for whatever the issue is that they're working on. But one of the huge things they chose as their social action issue was Israel. And, like the Jewish National Fund, or, raising money for, to give to the IDF, for instance. It's just like Israel became a huge, huge focus. And then when the birthright trips started happening, which the whole purpose was deep immersion in Zionist propaganda about Israel. Like basically does everybody know about the birthright trips?
Mm-hmm.
So those trips were funded by the Bronfman liquor fortune. And he's kind of a right-wing Jewish person who decided we're going to take young Jews at very formative stages of life, and we are going to give them an experience of like a lot of sex and alcohol and seeing the beauty of Israel, and teach them about kind of the state of Israel and how important it is to like move here. If you're not here, support it. And those birthright trips were really well funded because it was like a free trip for 2 weeks. And I certainly know many people who have done it. They're fun, they're engaging. Some of my kids did a version of it, my nieces, my nephews. I mean, it's kind of an amazing way to go to Israel. But the idea was have these cute IDF soldiers, and it's very relational, and there's all too much alcohol and sex. And you're only seeing a certain piece of what's true in Israel. It's a very kind of, after a while, a counter trip began, which actually took people to the West Bank, and they, sort of told more of the story of what's happening there. But anyway, all I'm saying is that, and the Holocaust became the other pillar of Jewish education, like teaching about anti-Semitism, about Nazi Germany, about concentration camps, about the curriculum would involve reading Anne Frank, many other sort of young adult books like Number the Stars was a big popular one. I don't know if anybody's ever read Number the Stars, but, another Holocaust story. And teaching Holocaust education. Those two things became the pillar. Like as a teacher in Hebrew schools, that was almost the entire curriculum during the era I was teaching in Hebrew school. And also for my kids, that was what they got. None of them learned to read Hebrew in Hebrew school. None of them came out of Hebrew school understanding pretty much anything about Judaism. Even to this day, my adult kids who actually want to be immersed in Jewish communities and they love Judaism, but they still want me to be teaching them things that you should have learned in a Jewish education with all the years you went through Hebrew school, just about how the calendar works, what it means, what the Midrash creativity is, all that stuff. That is not what they learned in Hebrew school. They got a lot about sort of Eastern Europe kind of background to the Holocaust. Like they were in the Fiddler on the Roof play. That was really fantastic. They learned all the songs. They had a lot of great experiences, but it was almost totally biased towards Israel and Holocaust. Israel Independence Day was huge every year. Everybody getting on buses, Israeli flags, marching off to the parade. And it turns out what was missing. Oh, Fran, go ahead.
Just the question is then, didn't they prepare them for bar and bat mitzvah then? I mean, that's what my Hebrew school was for.
Well, yeah, those places are also bar and bat mitzvah mills, but not with deep education. You kind of learn how to do your Torah portion kind of by rote, or you can phonetically read the Hebrew, which is all you can do in the amount of time you have. Even in my wonderful program, which I loved and Ethan loved, and my other graduates, some of them come to High Holy Days still. It was wonderful and relational and inspiring and engaging, but you just don't have enough time to really teach a language. So, you prepare the kid for bar mitzvah. They either memorize or can read phonetically their Torah portion, and they get up and chant from the Torah. Hopefully they learn something about the portion. But yes, those are bar mitzvah mills. And yeah. And really, in most mainstream synagogues, they sell Israeli bonds. It's like supporting Israel is a major part of the commitment of the Jewish community, the mainstream Jewish community. But what was being left out of all of that history was another big part of what was true. And it basically comes from the misconception that there was a land with no people for a people with no land, which was Herzl's big statement about the land, but actually people lived in that land. And it was true that the Jews were also indigenous to that land. It's not just a story of colonialism where Eastern European Jews came and settled a land that didn't belong to them. The Jews were also indigenous there. And today in the political world, usually one or the other piece of that gets left out. Either people see the settler colonialism, which is a true part of the story, or they see the indigenousness and not the settler colonialism, but actually it's a complicated story. Jews were indigenous thousands of years ago, so were the Palestinians. And Jews, there always was a living Jewish community in that land, kind of a remnant. But mostly Jews lived in the diaspora, spread all over the place in North Africa, Arab countries, Eastern Europe. And then when the political Zionist movement started in the late 1800s, it started in response to hard times for Jews, to anti-Semitism in Europe. Jews wanted a safe place and thought there was a land with no people for a people with no land. Very honorably thought that. They didn't try to go be oppressive to anybody. But it turned out there were people living there, 750,000 of whom, out of, I think there were about 1 million to start with, Arabs, basically fled and were urged to flee in 1947. And a lot of myths accrued around that. Oh, they wanted to leave because they were scared. Their own leaders told them to leave. Actually, when you look back at the real history that's now been unearthed, and if you want to go look at it for yourself, Benny Morris is an Israeli historian who's written big history books about this era and unearthed a lot of what was really happening. And the book we read for our one congregation a number of years ago called My Promised Land by Ari Shavit, he's an Israeli journalist, and he wrote a very good book that we read as a community. I urge people to go back and reread it. I'll put these things in the chat box. Benny Morris, Israeli historian. Ari Shavit, Israeli journalist. My Promised Land, very good book. And we also read The Lemon Tree together. And I encourage people to go back and reread The Lemon Tree because it's just a different era now and that we have different perspectives and we're all learning more now. Anyway, as it turns out, yeah.
I'll just add about The Lemon Tree. So the book group read The Lemon Tree again, I think last year.
Right.
And if you purchase a newer version of it, there are updates at the end of the book beyond the original. Yeah.
That's amazing.
For that in. Yeah.
That's really good to know. So it turns out that when the historians have actually looked at David Ben-Gurion's diaries, the conversations he was writing down had to do with the only way we're going to have a Jewish state here is to expel the Palestinians. We cannot coexist. Ethnic cleansing, basically. And at the time of the Israeli Independence War, 3/4 of the Palestinians fled, abandoning what they thought was very temporarily their homes and orchards and farms, and they moved into refugee camps, and they never were allowed back in. And that's what's become the festering massive refugee camps that are Palestinian refugee camps in the West Bank. And Amy?
Well, I mean, just contextually, in Exodus, the way they tell the story is that they couldn't let the Arabs stay because the Arab leadership had kind of put out a kill all the Jews, like intifada, or not what's the word, like when, like the Iranian, anyway, that they didn't see that there could be, as long as the Arab lead. That was just like, you want to say that just from the Exodus.
Good point. There was a long history, and you can read it in My Promised Land, which is very readable, of both sides hurting each other. There were terrible things on both sides for the years before the state started. But simultaneously, there was massive immigration of Jews. So the population was beginning to shift and shift and shift. And tensions were really rising as the Jews started living on the Palestinian land, buying more and more of it and bringing in resources and whatever. And to develop their orchards and their irrigation and their cities. And a lot of those cities, it turns out, were built on raised Muslim villages, Palestinian villages, like literally the Israeli homes built on the top of buried mosques. And, you can still go to some of these places and see the peaks of the domes poking out, but there was no documentation. Like, it took like investigative historians to go find out what did this village used to be, and excavations and things, because that history was not told. Very similar to what happened with Native American history in this country. But as has been said, the tragedy of the Jews is that kind of conquering took place in a century when there was much more international law and human rights global agreements. And so it no longer could be tolerated that those conquering practices, which actually every European country had done to its colonies, it wasn't just the Western Jews coming in and doing it to Palestine. That's what everybody had done in the 19th century. But by the mid-20th century, there was, there had been the League of Nations, and now there's the UN, and there was much more international law that said you can't go do that. You can't just go take over the home of another people. And the tragedy of the Jews is that is when the Jews became a nation state. I mean, you could say that's just sad because the United States did it to the Native Americans. And I'm not saying I recommend it. I'm just saying that it happened and we're way past it at this point, and maybe it can be made right through reparations or something new and different. But, nobody's saying you should just give back the United States of America to the Native Americans who very much owned it. But people are saying, Israel doesn't belong there as a nation state. And it really has to do with which century the thing happened in that international law developed. And we would probably all stand happily with the development of international law. So it became a very complicated situation. And the Jewish myth-making around it to sort of keep the focus on sustaining Israel was to not tell the truth about it, to just tell the side of the story about the Jews came in and made the desert bloom and, have been so inventive in building an economy and great education institutions, and not telling really the other side of the story, at whose expense and what happened to those people, and where are those people and what do those people want? And that has created this dilemma. And so today we're beginning to go back and look at sort of other pieces of the story that we literally didn't get in our Jewish education. We kind of were duped. And if you do watch the movie Israelism, it's about people of my kids' generation, like one of the people who made his Friend of Rosie's from Brown University, who kind of come of age and they realize they were misinformed. And they go back and they talk about what they learned in their Hebrew school educations and summer camps and birthright and all the experiences they have. And then what it felt like to discover what actually was true, what was the true history, which is much more complex than that. And people got hurt. Like if you pay attention to Native American history at all in this country, it wasn't just the big exciting story of we created democracy and, there also was another very, very tragic side of like bringing smallpox to Native Americans and murdering people and dislocating people and death marches. And, there's a whole other side of the story that's also true history that some parts of American history just leave out. So the kind of mainstream Jewish establishment has linked Holocaust and Israel so that there's kind of a false narrative. We suffered through the Holocaust. It was a terrible tragedy, but we got Israel. And that kind of linkage is not a necessary linkage at all. Like that wasn't the only solution to the Holocaust, but it was what happened. And it's what is kind of somehow very tied up in our hearts and souls now. And people today go visit Auschwitz and come out saying, Israel's the only place Jews can be safe. And I don't even know if it's true that the Jews can be safe in Israel, but it's certainly not the only place Jews can be safe. And that's a deeply entrenched linkage in sort of the mainstream Jewish world that's beginning to be questioned now and revisited. And it's just to say that there are Palestinians who also have important stories and history, and we didn't learn it. So, there was a big gap in our education about what was true. And Susan, I see you have a hand and Bobby has a hand. I'm sure people have a lot to say here. Susan?
Let me make sure can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
When you were saying that most of the Palestinians left and went to refugee camps or camps,
Yeah.
I never had that feeling that they left voluntarily. I was always under the impression that they were, forced to leave in 1948 in a lot of ways. And that's one of the reasons they're so resentful now.
Right. They fled in a moment of terror and they were planning to come back. They left like pots of soup on the stove. I mean, they didn't think they were leaving permanently. It's like, well, people who now have to flee because of a hurricane or flooding or something like that. They're planning to come back, but there's a real reason to leave for the moment. And I remember when I was first new to Judaism, what I learned was I only learned that the Arab leaders told them to leave. And I also learned that actually the Jews bought all the land. Sometimes they were absentee landlords, but like there was a real kind of myth around what turns out to be the history, which was they left, they chose to leave and just abandon their homes and orchards and lemon trees and voluntarily, which doesn't really make sense, but that was what we were told, and that the Jews honorably bought all the land, which also turns out not to be at all true, and that the Jews wanted to live peacefully, but the Arabs wouldn't. And that isn't true, because the Jews from the very beginning, the top Jewish leaders like David Ben-Gurion, who was a hero, were saying the only way we can have a Jewish state is to basically to have no Palestinians here. And that turns out to be how they saw it. Now, David Ben-Gurion was on the Haganah side. We remember last time we learned about two military groups before there was a state of Israel, which are technically terrorist groups, but one was David Ben-Gurion's group, the Haganah, and the other was the Irgun. We saw these things in our movie. And Jabotinsky, who was David Ben-Gurion's kind of rival, totally believed you have to annihilate the Palestinians if we're going to have a Jewish state. So David Ben-Gurion himself believed in ethnic cleansing secretly, but didn't say it publicly. Publicly, he said, we want to live in peace. But he was secretly running a military campaign to really empty the land of all Palestinians. And Jabotinsky outright said the only way we can do it is to have no Palestinians here. And he organized to accomplish that. Bobby, you were next.
Yeah, so I have a question going back to the Holocaust and the formation of Israel. And if it's not appropriate for this discussion, just tell me and we'll table it. But do you think that the timing of the formation of Israel was coincidental to the Holocaust and the freeing of the camps and that kind of stuff? You think it was intentional?
Oh, I think it was intimately tied to that moment in history. There had been a Zionist movement for what, like
right. Well, that was
years at that point. Yeah, a political Zionist movement where it was on the table and, nothing had really moved very far forward with it. But that was a moment of terror.
But the Holocaust created the urgency to do it.
I think that's right. Yeah. But it created, it wasn't just that was the only possible solution. It was that there needed to be some solution for how could Jews not have that happen again. And Zionist Jewish leaders were saying, well, the solution is we need our own nation.
Right.
And it was a time of nationalism where everybody wanted their own nation. Italy became Italy and, all the countries were becoming their own country.
Right.
In that era. Okay, I think Amy, I can't tell who was next. Amy, Karen, Louisa.
I'm just really quick. If people haven't seen Israelism, I just want to really throw out an advertisement for that. It's not a long movie. It's a freebie, and maybe Julie, you could send out the link again because it was sent out at another time. But I found it really impactful, interesting, and adds a level to this conversation. So that's all I wanted to say.
I'll send the link when I send the recording of the session.
Thank you so much, Bobby. That's a good idea, Amy. Okay, Karen and then Louisa.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time.
Okay, talk to us.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time. I don't see how you can separate the Holocaust from the birth of Israel. And I'm not saying in a manipulative way, but just the connection. And I mean, are those stories about, I don't know if they were orphans, but Jewish refugees that FDR, the known anti-Semite, wouldn't let into America? The boatloads of refugees from the Holocaust.
Right, the world
had no place to go.
The world had closed its borders to the Jews.
Right.
Right. And so what was, of all...
But that's a result of the Holocaust.
Well,
and Nazi Germany, basically.
There could have been many other solutions. Like, in a way, you need a solution that's going to make Jews safe in any land. Like, you don't want to go live in Israel. You want to be safe where you are, where your children are, and you speak the language, and you want to be safe where you do live, not necessarily feel like, well, somewhere else there's a country that, I could go to.
Yeah, a lot of us are feeling that right now.
And would you feel safe? Like, how many, you sort of have to ask how many people would feel personally safer in Israel right now, and why don't you go? Because you want to be safe here where you have a life. So it's like, it's not that Jews shouldn't be safe globally everywhere. We should be safe globally everywhere. But what's the range of possible solutions? Isn't just have your own nation. In fact, it turned out to be pretty destructive to Judaism to have our own nation, and Judaism is being totally torn apart. The Jewish community is being viciously torn apart right now internally because of there's big troubles. I mean, it's not necessarily the best and only solution. Another possible solution that people imagined was you have a nation where, Jews and Palestinians live in peace together and share a democracy. It's not a Jewish nation. It's not a Palestinian nation. There just are a range. I'm not even saying that couldn't work right at this moment either. But just having a nation state that's Jewish isn't the only, like an ethnocracy, is that what you call it? Isn't necessarily, it's not what we want in Arab countries where like the Taliban rules the country and it's a Muslim nation, which is safe for people who agree with that kind of Islam. We don't necessarily want that. It's not necessarily the best solution. It's just a solution that happened at a moment of huge global guilt. And partly because Zionist Jewish leaders, which were a fraction of the Jewish community, were saying, this is the solution, let's do it. So I think they were intimately linked at that moment of tragedy and guilt and horror.
Yeah, I just don't see how you can divorce them. I really, maybe I'm brainwashed, but I just don't see it.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I think you're in good company, that it's people. Okay, Louisa, let's give you a turn here. And Amy, is your hand still up? I can't tell, but Louisa. Louisa, can you unmute? We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I was thinking about how many times we've had to flee the nations that we've lived in over the course of the Bible and history and the Holocaust in different times. And when I was younger, you would think if people would talk about that they wouldn't go to Eastern Europe because they were afraid that they wouldn't get back through the Iron Curtain because they were Jewish or different things like that. And how many times we've had to flee. And then I was thinking about what you were talking about with America and the American Indians and the reservations and things like that. And we learned and the American Indians have learned how to live with the rest of the immigrants and different people and American born people from the United States here in the country and develop their own, I don't want to say their own economy, but in ways their own barter systems, their own systems that they have while living here with everybody else. And in certain respects, it shows you that if you don't learn history, it is doomed to repeat itself. Because right now, that's really what's happening in Israel, is that the Palestinians, because of the original call to order of killing all Jews, they didn't learn how to live together because they didn't learn where the commonalities are and the differences are in the religions to learn how to be together as a people and work together to have a nation.
Thank you for that. And I want to just acknowledge, anti-Semitism is a terrible problem in the world. It was a huge problem historically in Europe. Nobody's denying that. We all know where it led. The question is, what are the best solutions to address that? And what are just to think openly about possibilities. And, anyway, Amy, okay, anybody else? Does anybody who hasn't spoken yet want to share a comment? Okay, I wanted, for people who did watch Israelism, I want to ask, was there anything that was comforting for you to hear or that was hard for you to hear? And I'm going to just ask to briefly share because want to hear from people. And then I want to do our safety discomfort check before we end. Fran.
Yeah, it was very difficult for me to hear about how the Israeli soldiers treated the Palestinians, the IDF.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that was graphic in the film.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say there was anything comforting, but except that it was comforting to hear another side. But I guess what hit me was the extent to which the Israeli narrative was truly crafted and sold and packaged and marketed, and the making Aliyah and the right, and even the name Aliyah, that it's a good thing, it's a big thing, it's an important thing, and that it was really meant to bring more soldiers to the land, that they knew they needed more soldiers because they were surrounded by countries that wanted them dead. So it actually was a remarkably effective and good marketing campaign until Israel wasn't Israel anymore. I mean, for me, as I kind of, but just the levels at which that happened, and the marketing, the selling, the motivating, and realizing, geez, somebody was brilliant, just brilliant. So,
let me say thank you, Amy. Thank you very much. And happy birthday, Joan. I know some of you have to leave early to take Joan to her birthday lunch, and thank you very much for doing that. I hope somebody who's going heard that. I can't tell if they've already left. But anyway, thank you, Amy, for that. And I will say something I found that was comforting was that these committed young Jewish leaders of my children's generation want to know the truth of what happened back then. And it's not so that they'll stop being Jewish. They want to lead us into the future in a better way. I thought that's comforting. Like, they're beautiful human beings. If you look at who's narrating this movie, they're like these vibrant, young, smart, active Jewish leaders. Like, thank God, yay. And to me, that's moving, even though what they're saying is we were duped. We didn't really get the truth about this. And it's really painful to learn the truth because none of us intended to be, oppressing another people just as Jews have been oppressed in the past. So my son was actually just saying to me yesterday, the Gaza is actually more like the Warsaw Ghetto than genocide, because it's this trapped space where starvation is happening and people are being murdered. But it's not genocide in the sense that, you know, it's really bad. It's a crime against humanity, but genocide's something else, which is, anyway, he was making those distinctions. And anyway, okay. So anyone else want to say one thing? Anne, are you raising your hand? Yeah, go ahead, unmute.
Well, neither one of us went to Hebrew school. They didn't have it at St. Stephen's. And we came to Judaism quite late. So we didn't have any of those experiences, although I went to Israel when I graduated from high school. But our son, Hebrew school and religious school, and the curriculum, we were an informed congregation, the curriculum, because I taught, because nobody else wanted the 7th and 8th graders, was both history and Judaism. They really balanced it very well, and as best they could. And I, as a parent, was very happy with that because I knew something of the history, not nearly as much as I wish I had, but that when Liam went on a birthright trip to Israel, he came back and said very much the same thing. Wow, these people know how to market. He was happy to do it. He wanted to be in Israel just to see.
Yeah.
But that was his take on it too.
Interesting. Yeah. Very interesting.
Those are Mary's Catholic.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Diane?
I appreciated the film. Towards the end, I started to realize everybody's talking about propaganda, and in some ways, this film itself was selective in what it chose to show as well to make a point. And in the end, I wasn't quite sure what the end was sharing with me, other than I did get more discomfort because I just sensed that maybe we're being messaged about anti-Israel, and I started to not know, and then it ended. But there was this not clear to me. It's if I take what you said, that this was about just having one's eyes opened, and great value in that. But beyond that, what do you do with the knowledge? And that's where I got lost.
So, you know, I think that makes a lot of sense, Diane, in these polarized news environments and propaganda environments. I encourage people to check out the actual independent journalists and independent historians and just learn, and you can form your own opinions. You don't have to agree with anything you hear or read. Like, I think that's an important thing, is like open our minds and our hearts to learning things we didn't already know and other points of view. And you don't have to agree. Like, you might end up deciding to land here, land there. Like, you are a free agent who will do exactly what you want in terms of your contribution to anything, through activity, showing up, donations, whatever. But it's probably better just to be informed by more, especially independent sources, if possible. Anyway, we're going to do our safety discomfort circle here. I hope people who didn't get a chance to watch Israelism will watch and see how you relate to it. Okay, so our first one is, how safe do you feel in this Zoom room? Fist to 5. It's just a sense of the meeting. So I see a range of, I think, is it 4 to 5 or is it all 5s? I think I'm seeing all 5s there, 5 for safety. Okay, hands down, fist to 5 for discomfort.
Julie, so is 5 very comfortable?
Yeah, 5,
okay.
Yeah, discomfort. That's right. Okay, I think I'm seeing 3 or 2 to 5. Okay. Really interesting to be able to tell the difference between the two, and completely valid to feel anywhere you feel on those two spectrums. So thank you for sharing that, giving us a sense of where we are there. Bobby, are there any announcements you want to make?
Yeah, I wanted to add to what you said about how can people continue learning and forming their views and that kind of thing. And another resource is the Israel-Palestine group that has formed outside of Reconstructing Judaism, that is still active, is still doing programs. It is a biased group for the most part, but I have learned a tremendous amount. So if you don't get their emails and you want to, let me know and I can connect you to get on their email list. And it's led by a very knowledgeable, group of people. So I wanted to add that.
There also is, oh, sorry, I'll turn back to you in a second.
Right.
There's also a podcast by Peter Beinart that you can subscribe to through Substack. I listen to it. I find it very informative because he's a journalist who is focusing on Israel-Palestine, and he interviews people, very interesting people from all range of perspectives on these issues, including right-wing, left-wing. Like he's a journalist. He has his own views and commitments, but he is also acting as a actually brilliant journalist. So
perhaps just going to say he's pretty brilliant.
Yeah.
Perhaps, sorry, it's Diane. Perhaps maybe Bobby and Julie, you can put some resources together when you do send the link so that it's not just the film, but just some of these thoughts. That would be good to see them in one place.
I'll
or
see.
Start with something. Maybe one day we'll do a whole class, because I saw Fran, I saw your message in the chat box just wanting to know more about 1948, and that could be a whole other series of
no, I was just saying some of these independents or whatever it is that you just rattled off. That's all.
Peter Beinart is an Orthodox Jewish person who's definitely very committed to Palestinian liberation as well as to Jewish safety. And right, anyway, he's very interesting. And Bobby, if you can put access to his Substack.
Yeah, let me see, because I'll have to think about how to word it.
It's just a resource.
So
okay, last comment, Ellen. And then
very quickly, there's an amazing organization called Jamaat, which is Jews and Muslims and allies acting together, led by a former Israeli journalist and a Muslim woman who've written a book called We Refuse to Be Enemies. They actually lecture around the country. And they've also started a podcast, and they bring all kinds of folks on as part of their conversations. And it's a very open and honest dialogue about what's happening, and also I think some possible solutions, if we want to call them that, or at least suggestions for what it could look like moving forward. I'll put it in the chat.
Wonderful. And there's also Combatants for Peace, which is the same kind of thing. So very, very good groups. We can pursue these in the future.
There are many.
Okay. So I also want to say that right now things are at a place where no solution looks viable to anybody. There's no, right this minute in the course of what's going on, there is not any viable solution forward, but things emerge and change and, whatever. Bobby, back to you for announcements, if there are more.
Thank you. Tomorrow night is our book discussion group, and we're talking about Sarah's Key. And Nancy Axelrod's going to lead the discussion with some assistance in the form of questions that we received from Debbie Samuel. And it should be a really interesting discussion. So if you're not a member and you want the link, let me know, the Zoom link. It's tomorrow night at 7. And if you are a member, you'll be getting that Zoom link automatically. And I'm going to leave it at that. Look for more information on our Hanukkah program and all of our regular activities coming up. The third and final session of this series will be Sunday, December 15 at the same time, 11 a.m. So mark your calendars for that so you don't schedule something in conflict with it. And I will leave it at that. And thank you, Rabbi, because this is amazing.
And for our closing song, since we are all each other's teachers and students, I invite you to look at people in the Zoom room, like find a face, look at that face and sing this song. Then look at the next face and sing the song, like really connect you with somebody in this Zoom room. And we're going to sing together. For our teachers and our students and the students of our students, we ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. We ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. We ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. And I will tell you, I got to look at every single face in this Zoom room and wish you peace and loving kindness. Have a good Thanksgiving week. I'll see you all
Thanksgiving,
soon.
everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Rabbi Julie.
Thank you, Rabbi Julie.
Thank
Happy
you.
Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah.
You too.